Hey, what's up? Zach here, and today I've got the all-new Jordan Tatum 2. Let's get into them. Now the Tatum 2 is quite the departure from the Tatum 1, specifically in the outsole and the midsole, but also, you know, in the uppers as well. If you look at these ones, a pretty tight woven canvasy upper all the way from stem to stern, goes all the way through the shoe, so there is quite a bit of containment going side to side with this. This is a really tough backed upper. Now the tongue does have a ton of breathing pores through it, and I mean, it's kind of thin. There's padding throughout the whole thing, but it's not the thickest tongue in the world, but I didn't have any lace irritation with it either. Now that tongue is also very aggressively gusseted, and there really is, like I said, really no pores throughout the entire uppers. If you look at this thing on the breathability test, they heated up 146 degrees, which is quite a bit for sure. I mean, there was a lot of fog coming out of the tongue if you look at the breathability mapping of it. So there is air egress in this, right? And there is moisture egress, except for the fact that where you're producing the most heat and moisture, which is on the bottom and kind of on the sides of your foot, that's where you're going to be building up the most heat and moisture. Yeah, containment, specifically lateral containment, is outstanding in them. We'll talk about the medial containment when we get to the fit section. But when you combine this really tough backed upper, this canvasy upper, along with this really rubber piece on the outside that has outsole tread on it, some textile, and like I said, this rubber eyelet on there, it really does create quite a sense of security going laterally or, you know, pivoting on the outside of your foot, but it also creates quite a bit of moisture and heat buildup. Now, if you look at that on the upper durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, that black woven portion of it on the medial side, no damage whatsoever, which is pretty outstanding. But if you go to that woven canvasy upper there, the burr just rips right through that. So if you're pivoting and dragging on the right spots on this, you're not gonna get really any damage, or it's gonna be very, very minimal. Especially this nice little rubber piece right there. I really like that. That's actually a nice touch. But if you're toe dragging, like really extreme toe dragging on the tips of your toes, distal tip, then you are going to start to get some pretty decent wear if you're on an outdoor court. On an indoor court, I don't see the friction getting high enough to really do much to that. So on outdoor courts, it's going to wear down pretty quick. On indoor courts, honestly, I don't really think it's going to matter. And just one quick note about this makeup of the upper. Remember, there are no real big plastic pieces of foxing anywhere around there, especially on the heel. And so with that, because it's more of a fluid upper, it's all one type of fabric basically, you do get a much better lockdown because the laces can tie that down a lot easier. So heel slippage is really mild at best on these. So in terms of lockdown, lateral containment on this, a really nice combination if you can get over the other issues with it. Where the Tatum 2 really takes a fork in the road from the ones is in the midsole. If you look at this, it's an entire bed of air strobel. Now, if you go underneath of that, it is just pretty hard, dense EVA, right? It does have some serrations in the heel here for a little bit easier transition step, a little bit more comfort when you're crash landing. These will kind of bend a little bit, almost kind of artificially makes the foam feel a little bit softer. It is an incredibly low stack of foam in there, but because there's air strobel, it's still not terrible. Now, if you look at the bounce height test on this, this for me was the real tail of the tape. Only 25.5 centimeters in the heel and then 27 in the forefoot. Now, Air Max versus Zoom Air is always a little bit lower on the bounce height. Air Strobel versus Zoom Strobel is always a little bit less, right? It's just much more of a comfort cushion type feel. However, with the serrations in the heel of this, remember, it is just much more meant for shock absorption. This thing also does not have a shank. This thing gets a shank score of 0.0 because there just is none. And when you don't have a shank, a lot like some of Nike's tennis models, you gotta make the foam a little bit stiffer and harder. And depending on how that's tooled with the different air systems in there, sometimes it's gonna feel a little bit deadened. That's what these feel like. They feel very deadened on court. Yes, you get a lot of cushion from the air strobel, but when we talk about the fit section, a lot of people probably aren't even gonna feel much of that air strobel. So yeah, for the right foot type, a lot of cushion, right? But don't expect these to be rocket ships either. Getting into the outsole tread, this is where the Tatum 2s remind me of some more old school Jordan shoes. It's a real hodgepodge, right? Now, number one, you actually have foam coming down here, which if you remember the Tatum 1s, they had that ground contact foam all the way in the heel, so that kind of reminds me of that. Then you do have some more traditional, more circular rubber going around there with just these really thin lines, almost like track circles here of rubber. Then you have kind of quasi herringbone in the middle of that. Then just some flat rubber pieces here, especially in the forefoot, and that same kind of almost wavy herringbone here in the forefoot. Now, what I noticed on these, I guess I should say, on the grip test ramp, the initial grip was 36 degrees. I actually found that to be a nice kind of forgiving, you know, a nice middle ground between forgiving and grip when you first have them on, especially because it is a full-length tread pattern, so you are getting grip pretty much anywhere you put this shoe, right? There's rubber contact in the ground no matter where you are. The problem with that is these things are absolute dust busters. They pick up dust faster than any shoe I've ever seen, and they hold on to that dust, right? Like, you wipe it off, it just comes right back. So the grip is not very confidence-inducing. Number two, the wavy herringbone, that quad, it's not really herringbone, it's almost like zebra stripes. It's not going to have the really razor-sharp grip of some other shoes, a little more flat. So when you're picking up dust, I mean, yeah, once the rubber warms more, it starts to grip a little bit better, but then it's also picking up more dust. It's just the profile of them, you gotta be constantly wiping them down. Honestly, on outdoor courts, this shoe is gonna grip better. The problem is, if you look at the Outsole durability test on this 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, I mean, really every single piece of rubber there is getting millimeter of damage. The durometer on every single piece of rubber doesn't really get much past 15.5 on average. And then you've got foam around here too, which is not ground contact foam. This is just regular foam. So, you know, on a rubberized court, I think these do probably their best work. I think just because you can get the friction, the tack a little bit higher. On a real sticky indoor hardwood court, they're gonna be okay. And if you're someone that can just, you know, constantly be wiping them down, right? If you're constantly rubbing your shoes, wiping them down, you're gonna get a pretty forgiving grip. Like I said, when they weren't picking up dust, when I first had them on, I actually really enjoyed the profile of them, just enough give. And then because the rubber is a little bit flatter in the forefoot, if you're playing up on the balls of your foot, you actually do get a little bit easier transition step. I think as long as you stay on top of them, if you're pretty religious about keeping the dust off of them, you're gonna get a pretty, you know, forgiving profile. Now, the one thing about these is you look at the speed ratio on them, they only come in at a gentlemanly 1.76, no additional points for the shank because there is none. And honestly, I think that's where they belong. These things did not feel fast whatsoever. And not even to the point where some shoes, they're, you know, they don't give you much back, but they're really light. They're easy to get from step to step, right? They just transition so easily. They're really like a breeze on your foot. They just feel dull. Now, for a shoe with air strobel and with not very of a plush riding foam underneath of there, they don't feel terrible, right? Because the stack is so low, you do feel like you get a little bit more ground contact, especially through air, because a lot of times through air, you're not gonna get a lot of ground contact. These actually do a decent job of still having, you know, maintaining some ground contact and ground feel, but in terms of speed, yeah, these are one of the more deadened feeling shoes out there. There are some people that absolutely love that. I know specifically a few people I'm thinking of right now that absolutely love this type of feel in a shoe. But if you want that feeling a little more springboard, a little bit more give back, then yeah, these just aren't your shoe. I think the real crux of the Tatum 2 comes in its fit, because this is what's gonna make some people think they feel great and some people think they feel terrible. Now, number one, the length on them is just a hair long. The width on them is a little bit narrow, but if you look at the midfoot of the shoe, you can just see it here on the removable insole. The midfoot is where the width is just really razor thin, right? It just compresses that middle part of the foot. So you're anybody with a higher volume foot, right? It's really gonna start to compress down. And with that, you mainly more feel the uppers of these versus the air strobel, right? There's not enough room in there for your foot to actually compress the air strobel, right? Because you're being compressed by the uppers at the same time. So for me, I didn't really feel a ton of the air strobel unless I was kind of coming down on my heel. It almost felt like because the uppers were squishing me so much, they were almost suspending you a little bit above the air strobel. So I didn't really feel much of it, right? The other thing is these shoes sit very foot flat, right? They're very everted. That's another way they get a lot of their stability. Now, in terms of lateral stability, fantastic. Medial stability though, not so great. So, I mean, a narrow and medium foot can go true to size. A 2E, you better be going up at least a half size on these. Because they are a little bit longer, honestly, half size on these is probably gonna be a limit, just because, unless you have longer toes, right? If you have longer feet, you're fine. 4E, I think, is just probably a mismatch on these. Now, in terms of snake bitten foot, like I said, with the medial and lateral stability, so in terms of lateral stability, they're fantastic. In terms of medial stability, heel pain, anything like that, because they sit so everted, and because there's no shank, yeah, initially, if you're not somebody with a pancake flat foot, they're gonna be okay, but you better throw an orthotic in these. An orthotic, I think, at least might, especially more of a rigid orthotic, might actually push the uppers out a little bit more, give you a little bit more room. So something like a Power Step Pinnacle on these, I think is probably the ideal fit. That's also gonna be something that at least gets you a little bit more to neutral, something maybe with a flatter heel in there, like the Pinnacle Max with a little bit of a flatter heel is gonna at least push you up a little bit. So with an orthotic, they're okay for a more narrow or medium foot. If you're somebody with a wider foot or somebody with real instability or hypermobility, like I said, these just might not offer enough support in them to make it worth it for you. And getting into the all-important playability, I've said this so many times in videos, it's becoming rote. I need as much help as I can get on the basketball court, right? So I really notice it when a shoe gives me a lot back and I feel more nimble, right? I am not a super nimble basketball player, right? Like I am a hefty dude. And so these made me feel all of me, put it that way, right? If you really want to do some self-reflection, this is a great shoe for you. They did, like I said, they felt a little bit dull. They can be nice shoes for more tactile feel, like I said, with an air strobel unit. It is pretty good, right? I mean, for the lateral stability that these give you with air strobel and the ground feel they give you with air strobel, I think that is actually a pretty big feat to get. So I do like that. You know, for such a low stack, they're not as nimble as the Jordan 38 or 38 low, which, yeah, they have low stacks of foam, but look what you get back from them, right? They offer so much, especially in the forefoot in terms of pivoting power and everything. You know, they just, to me, they remind me more of the Jaw one more than anything else, right? And honestly, they're not even as responsive as the Jaw one was for me. So I would say if you like that feel, right, it's almost like a tennis player playing with a really deadened feeling racket, right? Because they want their hands to be the one thing that feels everything there. If you want your foot to be the one that feels everything on the court and to create everything on the court, then yes, these are a fantastic option for you. And like I said, I do think there's gonna be a lot of people that think these are out of this world, especially a narrow-footed player concerned about a little bit more lateral stability, wants good lockdown in a shoe, and has a little bit more of that tactile game, right? Has very good, very quick, fast, lightweight footwork, right? If you're someone that floats from step to step and just want that ground feel, but also with air strobel, then yeah, these are fantastic. And so that's why I always said, there's no such thing as a good or bad shoe, right? They're just good and bad for you. And so, like I said, there definitely are gonna be people that do like these. It's just that if you're looking for something, even like the Tatum one, right, this just isn't it. It's a departure, at least in my opinion. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below about it, especially if you were someone that had the Tatum ones. Are you going to these? If you've tried them, let me know in the comments down below. And if you do want to see the older sibling to the Tatum 2s, the Jordan 38 lows going to the knife, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you someone in the Sneakerverse.